Welcome to Silent Queen's Rise. Now, let's get into the story. Gavin Holloway stood at the center of the conference room he believed he owned. His arm draped around his 26-year-old assistant's shoulders, and he was laughing. Not the polite, restrained laugh of a man in a professional setting. The loud, unguarded laugh of a man who believed there was no one left in the room capable of embarrassing him. His wife, Isla Holloway, stood in the doorway of that same conference room, holding a box of his dry-cleaned suits she had driven 40 minutes in Friday afternoon traffic to deliver, and she watched him press his lips to Demi Park's temple, as if the plate glass wall separating them from the rest of the open-plan office was not made of glass at all, but of solid stone. Isla did not drop the box. She did not make a sound. She simply stood there for a long, specific moment, long enough to confirm exactly what she was seeing, and then she set the box down quietly on the reception desk and walked back to the elevator. The receptionist, a young man named Cole who had always been kind to her, started to say something. Isla shook her head once, and he stopped. She pressed the lobby button. The elevator doors closed. She had known for 3 months that something was wrong. The phone left face down on every surface. The unexplained late evenings that never quite matched the project timelines she had reviewed in passing. Because Isla had a habit of reviewing things in passing that most people did not notice she was reviewing at all. She had not confronted Gavin because she was afraid. She had not confronted him because she was still making certain. Now, she was certain. To understand the full weight of what Gavin Holloway had just done by laughing in that conference room, you had to understand what that building actually was. Gavin believed he was the co-founder and chief executive of Holloway Meridian, a mid-sized commercial real estate consulting firm, headquartered in a gleaming 12-story building in downtown Austin, Texas. He believed this because he had signed the incorporation papers. He had given speeches at the ribbon cutting. He had printed his name on the glass door in brushed silver lettering. He kept a framed photograph of that door on his desk, angled precisely so that every person who sat across from him during a meeting would see it. What Gavin did not know and had never bothered to find out was that the seed capital that made Holloway Meridian possible had not come from the venture firm he believed had funded him. The venture firm was real. The partner who shook his hand at the closing dinner was real, but the quiet, invisible entity that had backstopped the entire round, that had guaranteed the debt facility. When Gavin's own credit history came back with 3 judgments he had concealed from his investors, was a private holding company called Arden Capital Group. Isla's family had founded Arden Capital Group in 1987. Isla's mother, a woman who had spent 40 years building a portfolio of commercial real estate assets across 7 states, without once appearing on a single business publication's list of notable investors, had structured the backstop herself. At Isla's quiet request 4 years ago, when Gavin's company was 6 weeks from collapse and he did not know it, Isla had gone to her mother not because she wanted to save Gavin. She had gone because 230 employees depended on that payroll, and Gavin's recklessness was not their fault. Her mother had agreed on one condition: the structure would give Arden Capital a silent preferred position, meaning that in any dissolution, sale, or restructuring event, Arden's interest was recovered first, in full, before Gavin saw a dollar. Gavin had signed the documents. He had signed them the way he signed everything Isla placed in front of him, with the breezy, incurious confidence of a man who believed his wife's job in their marriage was to manage the paperwork so he did not have to think about it. He had not read them. He never read them. Isla drove home from downtown Austin on that Friday evening with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The house they lived in was a 4-bedroom craftsman on a quiet street in Tarrytown that she had purchased in her own name 8 years ago, before the marriage, using a distribution from one of her family's trusts. Gavin's name was not on the deed. He had mentioned this once, 2 years into the marriage, in that particular tone of casual displeasure that he deployed when he wanted something corrected, without appearing to demand it. Isla had smiled and said she would look into updating the paperwork. She had never looked into it, and he had never asked again, because men like Gavin moved on quickly to the next thing they wanted, and because some part of him, the part that understood financial exposure, even if he pretended otherwise, had decided not to press it. She pulled into the garage, sat in the quiet of the car for a moment, and then she called her sister. Her sister, Faye, answered on the second ring. Faye was 41, 3 years older than Isla, and she was a family law attorney in Houston who had handled enough dissolutions of marriages like Isla's to speak about them with the clipped efficiency of a trauma surgeon. Isla had not called Faye to cry. She had called because she needed to hear someone confirm that the plan forming in her mind over the past 3 months was sound. She laid it out in 10 minutes, sitting in the dark of her garage with the engine ticking as it cooled. When she finished, Faye was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've already spoken to Mom last week," Isla said. Another pause. "He has no idea, does he?" Isla said. "Okay," Faye said. "Then let's talk about timing." Gavin came home that night at 9:30. He smelled like a restaurant Isla recognized, a wine bar near the office that he had taken her to on their second anniversary, and he was in the elevated, expansive mood of a man who had spent the evening in the company of someone who found everything he said fascinating. He kissed her on the cheek, asked what she had done with her day, and did not wait for the answer before opening the refrigerator and making commentary about what was or was not inside it. Isla sat at the kitchen island and watched him. She had learned to do this over 4 years of marriage, to observe him with the kind of detached clarity that she had originally developed as a coping mechanism and that had ultimately become something closer to data collection. She noticed the way his collar was slightly rebuttoned, one eyelid off from where he had started the morning. She noticed the particular flush at the base of his neck that she had once mistaken for wine and now understood better. She said nothing about the conference room. She said nothing about the dry cleaning she had left at reception, which he also did not mention. She asked about his week. He told her about a deal he was pursuing, a commercial portfolio in South Austin. The kind of deal that would, he said, absolutely transform the firm's revenue profile for the next 3 years. He used the word transform 3 times in 4 minutes. Isla nodded at the appropriate intervals. That night, after he fell asleep, she opened her laptop at the kitchen table and began drafting a short email to the director of investor relations at Arden Capital, a methodical man named Preston, who had worked for her family for 11 years and who communicated exclusively in bullet points and calendar invitations. The email was 3 sentences. It requested a formal review of the backstop position in Holloway Meridian and asked that Arden's general counsel be placed on standby for a potential structural event. She ended it with, "Please treat this as priority 1 and do not communicate through any shared channels." She sent it at 11:47 in the evening. Preston replied at 11:52 with a single line. "Understood. Standby activated." For the next 6 weeks, Isla's life looked identical to what it had always looked like from the outside. She attended Gavin's firm dinners. She organized the couple's annual holiday gathering, which was really a networking event with catering. She drove the dry cleaning and smiled at the appropriate people and gave every external indication of a woman who was contentedly occupied with the management of a comfortable life. What was actually happening beneath that surface was something different entirely. Preston and Arden's legal team had spent those 6 weeks conducting a quiet, thorough audit of every financial instrument connected to Holloway Meridian. What they found was not surprising to Isla, though the scale of it was clarifying. Gavin had been diverting consulting fees from 3 separate client accounts into a personal LLC he had registered in Nevada 2 years ago. The total was not enormous, just under $400,000, but the mechanism was deliberate and structured in a way that indicated he had expected to do it for a long time. He had also used company funds to lease a furnished apartment in the Domain, Austin's northern mixed-use district, in the name of his LLC. The apartment was where he had been taking Demi Park on the evenings he explained away as client dinners. Isla read the audit summary on a Tuesday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with her second cup of coffee. She read it the way she read most things, carefully, without expression, making occasional small notes in the margin of the printed document. When she finished, she folded the document, slid it into a manila envelope, and placed it in the fireproof filing cabinet in her home office. Then she called Preston and told him it was time. He asked her how she wanted to sequence it. She told him. There was a pause on Preston's end that she had learned, over 11 years, meant he was impressed, but was too professional to say so. Then he said, "I'll begin today." The sequence started on a Wednesday. It started quietly, the way most consequential things start, with paperwork. Arden Capital's general counsel formally notified Holloway Meridian's board, a 3-person body that Gavin had stacked with allies, that Arden was invoking its preferred position review clause. This was a clause buried on page 31 of the original investment documents, the documents Gavin had not read, which allowed Arden to demand a full financial disclosure and governance audit any time it had reason to believe its secured position was at risk. The clause also allowed Arden to appoint a temporary independent observer to attend all board meetings until the audit was complete. The observer Arden appointed was a quiet, precise woman named Dr. Rowe, a forensic accounting specialist who had previously worked for the SEC's Enforcement Division, and who had the particular quality of making every person in a room feel simultaneously under examination and somehow uncertain they had done anything right in their entire professional lives. Dr. Rowe arrived at Holloway Meridian's offices on Thursday morning with a rolling briefcase and a junior associate and requested access to the firm's financial systems. Gavin called Isla from his office at 9:15 that morning. His voice had the tight, controlled quality of a man suppressing a significant amount of alarm. "Do you know anything about an Arden Capital audit?" he asked. Isla was in her car parked outside a coffee shop. "I've heard of Arden Capital," she said. "They were part of the original funding structure, weren't they?" A pause. "They had some kind of secured position. It should have been minor. What does your general counsel say?" Another pause, longer. "He's reviewing the documents now." "Then I'm sure you'll have more information soon," Isla said, pleasantly. "What time will you be home tonight?" He said he didn't know. He sounded distracted. She told him she would leave dinner in the refrigerator. By Friday afternoon, Gavin's general counsel had read page 31. He had also, at that point, read pages 32 through 37, which Gavin had also not read, and which specified in clear, unambiguous contractual language the full scope of Arden's secured preference, including the provision that in a dissolution scenario triggered by a material breach of fiduciary duty by a founding executive, Arden had the right to initiate an orderly wind-down of the company's assets, recovering its position in full before any equity holder, including Gavin, received any proceeds. The general counsel requested an emergency meeting with Gavin at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Isla knew this because Preston texted her at 3:50 with the single word, "proceeding." She was sitting in her kitchen when Gavin came home that evening. He came through the garage door at 7:30 and stopped when he saw her at the table. She had made dinner, pasta, the kind she made when she wanted the evening to feel ordinary. And she had set 2 places, and she was reading a book with a glass of water beside it, and she looked precisely like the wife he had spent 4 years not quite seeing. He sat down across from her. He was pale. She had never seen him pale before. "Isla," he said, "I need to talk to you." "Okay," she said. She put the book down and gave him her full attention. He told her about the audit. He told her about Arden Capital's legal position, framing it as an inexplicable ambush, a technicality that his lawyers were going to resolve, a situation that was fundamentally fine, but that required him to focus for the next few weeks. He told her this in the careful, edited language of a man who was leaving out the part about the Nevada LLC and the apartment in the Domain and the $400,000, and also the part about Demi Park. Isla listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "It sounds complicated." "It is," he said, "but I have it handled." "I'm sure you do," she said. And then, very gently, she asked, "Gavin, who is Demi Park?" The color that had begun to return to his face drained back out again. He was quiet for a moment, a specific kind of quiet. The quiet of a man rapidly sorting through available options and finding that they were fewer than expected. "She's an employee," he said. "She is," Isla agreed. "She's also the person you were with in the conference room last Friday when I brought your dry cleaning. And she is, based on the lease records for the Domain apartment, the primary occupant of the residence your LLC has been funding with company money for the past 14 months. Gavin stared at her. Isla folded her hands on the table. She had rehearsed this moment, not the words but the quality of stillness she wanted to maintain, and she found, sitting there, that no rehearsal had been necessary. The stillness was simply there, underneath everything, the way it had always been. "I want a divorce," she said. "I've already retained Faye." His expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Denial, then calculation, then something that looked almost like relief before it was replaced by anger. "You retained your sister," he said. "You were already planning this." "I've been planning it for 3 months," Isla said. "The audit," he said slowly. "Arden Capital." "You did that. Arden Capital is exercising its contractual rights," Isla said. "What happens next is really between them and your lawyers." He stood up. He was trying to recover the physical authority that he usually wore like a second suit, the particular way he took up space in a room to signal that he was the person around whom the room organized itself. He pointed at her across the dinner table. "You have no idea what you just started," he said. This firm is my life. I built it. Isla looked at him steadily. You built it on a foundation you didn't read. He left that night. He did not say where he was going, and she did not ask, because she knew, and because it did not matter. She sat at the table after his car backed out of the driveway, and she ate her dinner, and she finished her chapter, and then she washed both plates and went to bed. She slept better than she had in months. What followed happened in a sequence that was very fast, as these things go, once they are set in motion by people who have spent months preparing for them. Arden's audit formally identified the diversion of client funds the following Tuesday, by Wednesday morning. The 3 client firms whose accounts had been affected had been quietly notified by Arden's legal team. All 3 elected to file civil complaints. The Nevada LLC was subpoenaed. The apartment lease was entered into the civil record. Holloway Meridian's board, faced with the combined weight of an investor audit, 3 civil complaints, and a founding executive, credibly accused of misappropriating client funds, voted on Thursday afternoon to accept Arden's proposed restructuring, which placed the firm under independent management, pending wind down or sale. Gavin's equity interest, which he had believed was worth somewhere between $4 and $8 million, depending on market conditions, was subordinated entirely to Arden's preferred position. After Arden's secured stake was repaid, plus interest and fees incurred during the audit, Gavin's share of any remaining proceeds was projected at somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000. He called Isla's cell phone 4 times on Thursday evening. She did not answer. He left one voicemail that began with anger and ended somewhere that sounded almost like grief. The particular grief of a man who has just understood for the first time that the life he believed he was living had significantly different dimensions than he had assumed. She listened to it once, and then she forwarded it to Faye for the file. Demi Park, whose accounts had been frozen as a named party in one of the civil complaints pending investigation of whether she had knowingly received improperly sourced funds, moved out of the Domain apartment on Friday. She had retained her own attorney. Based on the communications Arden's forensic team had recovered from the firm's servers, communications which Gavin had sent on a company device, she had received several messages indicating that the money was a bonus, properly processed, nothing she needed to think twice about. Her attorney was making a case that she was a victim of the same deception as the client firms. Isla did not dispute this. She had no particular feeling toward Demi Park. Demi Park was 26 years old and had been told things by a man she trusted, and Isla understood what it felt like to be in a room with Gavin Holloway and believe what he said, because she had spent 4 years in that room herself before she learned to pay attention to the documents. 3 weeks after the dining room conversation, Isla was sitting in her home office on a Tuesday morning when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she did not recognize. It read, "This isn't how people are supposed to treat each other. I thought you loved me. I have nothing." She read it once. She recognized the number on second look as the personal cell Gavin had used before his company. Phone was surrendered in the discovery process. She set the phone down on her desk and looked out the window for a moment. The oak tree in the backyard was beginning to show the first pale green of early spring, new leaves at the very tips of the branches, small and tentative. She thought about the version of herself who had stood outside that elevator 6 weeks ago, with a box of dry cleaned suits and no expression on her face. She thought about the drive home and the phone call to Faye and the email to Preston at 11:47 in the evening. She picked up the phone. She typed one sentence. "You do have something, Gavin. You have exactly what you built." She sent it. Then she set the phone face down on the desk, opened the property listing she had been reviewing from a firm in Marfa, Texas, a piece of land her family had been considering for a conservation trust partnership, and she went back to work. There is a particular kind of woman who is never recognized as dangerous until it is over. She does not raise her voice. She does not issue ultimatums. She does not perform her power for an audience, because she has never needed an audience to know what she is worth. She keeps excellent records. She reads the documents. She waits for the moment when the architecture of someone else's arrogance has been fully mapped, and then she does not demolish it loudly. She simply withdraws the one foundation they never knew was hers to begin with, and she watches without cruelty but without sentiment, as everything built on false ground finds its true level. Gavin Holloway spent 4 years believing he was the most powerful person in his marriage. It turned out he had simply been the loudest.